Your soulmate was caught last night. Who were they with? My beloved child, hold your thoughts for just one moment, because what was witnessed last night was not what it seemed at first glance. Before assumptions take control of your heart, allow this story to unfold. Sometimes the eyes notice a scene, but only patience uncovers the truth hidden inside it. There is a reason this message found you today. There is a reason your attention stopped here instead of somewhere else. What if the question that's been echoing inside you, who were they with, is only the beginning of a much greater revelation? Stay with this journey, because every answer opens another unexpected door. Last night, when the world was growing quiet and most people had already surrendered to sleep, an unexpected encounter quietly changed the direction of someone's emotional journey. Your soulmate was seen in a place they never expected anyone to notice. The whispers began immediately. Stories started forming before facts had the chance to breathe. Every witness believed they understood what they had seen. Yet every witness was missing the same invisible piece. Have you ever noticed how destiny often disguises its greatest moments as ordinary events? Think carefully. The people standing nearby only saw two figures sharing a conversation beneath the fading lights. They saw expressions. They saw gestures. They saw silence between words. But silence has many meanings. Some silences carry regret. Others carry forgiveness. And sometimes, silence carries the courage to finally close a chapter that has remained unfinished for far too long. This is where the story becomes different from what everyone expected. The person standing beside your soulmate was not creating distance between you and them. Instead, that meeting was quietly removing a barrier that had existed for much longer than either of you realized. No dramatic arguments. No scenes. No betrayal. Just one conversation that carried the weight of many unanswered years. Pause for a second. What if the moment that appeared most confusing eventually becomes the reason everything finally starts making sense? Life has a mysterious rhythm. It often rearranges events behind the curtain long before the audience notices the stage has changed. While others rushed to conclusions, something much deeper was unfolding. Your soulmate wasn't running toward the future. They were carefully releasing the past. That difference changes everything. Yet even your soulmate didn't fully understand why they felt drawn to that meeting. Something inside them kept whispering that one unfinished conversation could no longer remain unfinished. It wasn't logic pulling them there. It wasn't pressure. It was an inner knowing, a feeling impossible to explain but equally impossible to ignore. Sometimes the heart recognizes the next step before the mind can describe it. And perhaps you've experienced this too. Moments when you suddenly felt connected to someone without knowing why. Moments when your intuition became louder than your doubts. Those moments rarely arrive by accident. As the night continued, something unexpected happened during that conversation. A single sentence shifted the entire atmosphere. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Yet its impact echoed deeper than anyone standing nearby could ever imagine. Your soulmate realized they had been carrying someone else's expectations instead of listening to their own heart. Imagine discovering that the path you've been walking was never truly yours. Would you keep walking? Or would you finally choose differently? Questions like these don't arrive every day. They arrive only when life prepares someone for transformation. That is why this story isn't really about who your soulmate was seen with. It is about who they are becoming. The outside world noticed the meeting. But destiny noticed the awakening. And those are two completely different things. Some people will continue believing the surface version because surface stories are easier to accept. But the deeper story belongs only to those willing to wait long enough for the truth to reveal itself piece by piece. You may already sense that this isn't the end. Because it isn't. What happened after that conversation became even more unexpected. A decision was quietly made before sunrise, one that would influence not only your soulmate's future, but yours as well. No announcements were made. No promises were spoken aloud. Yet something invisible had already begun moving into place. Stay a little longer when this journey continues. Because the person your soulmate met last night left behind one final message. And once that message is revealed, the question, who were they with, will no longer be the mystery that matters. The real mystery is why that meeting happened exactly when it did. A strange realization began to settle in before the first light of morning touched the horizon, and this is where the story takes a turn almost no one saw coming. The meeting itself was important, but what happened immediately afterward carried even greater meaning. If you've stayed this far, you're beginning to see that appearances rarely tell the whole story. Keep listening, because the next few moments reveal why last night was never about secrecy, it was about clarity. As your soulmate walked away from that conversation, they didn't look back. Not because they didn't care, but because something inside them had finally become lighter. The weight they had carried for so long, the unanswered questions, the misplaced guilt, the pressure to please everyone except themselves, was beginning to fade. The person they had met didn't hand them a new future. They handed them a new perspective. There is a difference. A future depends on choices yet to come. A perspective changes every choice that follows. That single shift was enough to make your soulmate stop and ask themselves a question they had avoided for far too long. What has my heart been trying to tell me all along? Sometimes the most powerful answers don't arrive with loud celebrations. They arrive quietly, in a moment when the world isn't watching. And perhaps that is why so many people misunderstood what happened last night. They focused on who was standing beside your soulmate instead of noticing what was changing within them. Take a moment to think about your own journey. How many times has life surprised you by revealing that what looked like a setback was actually preparation? How many times did confusion eventually become understanding? Destiny often works in exactly that way. As your soulmate continued walking into the quiet night, memories began replaying in their mind. Not with regret, but with new understanding. They remembered conversations that once felt ordinary but now carried hidden meaning. They remembered moments when they almost reached out, yet fear convinced them to stay silent. Piece by piece, those memories began fitting together like a puzzle that had waited patiently for the missing pieces. Then something unexpected happened. A simple message appeared on their phone. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was only a few words. But those words confirmed what their heart had already begun to realize. some connections cannot be measured by distance or time. They continue growing beneath the surface, even when nothing seems to be happening. At that very moment, your soulmate smiled, not because every question had been answered, but because they finally understood which questions truly mattered. The mystery was never about another person replacing you. The mystery was about releasing everything that had prevented them from moving forward with honesty. Before we continue, if this story has made you reflect on your own path, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Stories like this often mean something different to every listener. And if you're enjoying these journeys of mystery, emotion, and self-discovery, subscribing simply helps you find the next chapter when it's ready. Now listen closely. Just when your soulmate believed the night was finally over, they noticed one last detail from that meeting, something so small that almost anyone else would have ignored it. Yet that tiny detail pointed toward a truth far greater than the conversation itself. And once they recognized it, there was no turning back. The next chapter begins with that forgotten clue, and it may completely change the meaning of everything you've heard so far. Before the sun fully welcomed the new day, one final piece of the puzzle quietly emerged, and suddenly, the events of last night no longer looked like a mystery. They looked like preparation. If you've stayed with this story until now, don't leave just yet, because what you're about to hear is the moment everything begins to connect. Your soulmate couldn't stop thinking about that overlooked detail. It wasn't a dramatic confession or a hidden message. It was something far simpler. A promise made long ago, one they had almost forgotten. During that conversation, the other person had gently reminded them of a decision they once made when fear was controlling their life instead of hope. That reminder changed everything. For the first time in a long while, your soulmate realized they had been living according to old doubts instead of present truth. They had allowed yesterday's uncertainty to shape today's choices. But last night became the turning point where the past quietly lost its influence. Have you ever noticed how one honest conversation can accomplish what years of overthinking never could? That is exactly what happened. As morning approached, your soulmate looked toward the horizon with a different mindset. They weren't searching for signs anymore. They were becoming ready to recognize them. Instead of wondering what might go wrong, they began asking what could finally go right. That shift may sound small. But every new chapter begins with one new thought. The meeting that everyone misunderstood wasn't about creating a new bond. It was about closing an old circle with gratitude and peace. Once that chapter was respectfully left behind, your soulmate felt something they hadn't experienced for a very long time. Freedom. Not freedom from another person. Freedom from hesitation. Freedom from carrying questions that no longer deserve their energy. And once the heart becomes free, it naturally begins moving toward what truly matters. Perhaps that is why this story reached you today. Not to convince you that every mystery has an immediate answer, but to remind you that the truth often grows quietly while assumptions grow loudly. Last night became proof that appearances can mislead, while patience reveals the deeper picture. Now imagine this. What if the next conversation your soulmate chooses to have is the one they've been postponing for far too long? What if the courage they discovered last night is only the beginning? Sometimes destiny doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it begins with a peaceful decision that no one else notices. That is exactly how meaningful change often starts. And maybe, just maybe, this unexpected encounter was never meant to separate paths. It was meant to remove everything standing between them and the future they are finally ready to embrace. If this journey has resonated with you, I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments. Every listener notices a different clue, and your insight might encourage someone else. And if these cinematic stories of mystery, hope, and destiny speak to you, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next chapter when it arrives. Remember this as today's story comes to a close. Don't let the first version of any story become your final belief. The deepest truths often reveal themselves only to those willing to wait, reflect, and see beyond the surface. Because last night wasn't remembered for who your soulmate was with. It was remembered for who they decided to become. That quiet decision may shape every chapter that follows, and perhaps the most meaningful part of this story is still waiting just beyond the horizon. Just when it seemed the mystery had finally settled, an unexpected ripple from that night reached far beyond the conversation itself. The truth has a remarkable way of revealing itself at exactly the right moment, and what followed wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quietly undeniable. If you've stayed with this story until now, you've witnessed how assumptions slowly gave way to understanding. But there is one final chapter, and it may be the one that stays with you long after this video ends. In the days that followed, your soulmate noticed something they had overlooked for months. Their choices were becoming lighter. Their thoughts were becoming clearer. The uncertainty that once clouded every decision was no longer leading the way. They weren't waiting for someone else to tell them who they should become. Instead, they were finally listening to the quiet confidence that had always been within them. That meeting last night didn't change their destiny. It revealed it. Sometimes we spend so much time searching for extraordinary signs that we fail to recognize the ordinary moments that quietly transform us. A simple conversation. A forgotten promise. A peaceful goodbye. These are often the moments that redirect an entire future. Think about your own life for a moment. How many times has something that seemed confusing at first eventually become one of your greatest lessons? Perhaps this story isn't only about your soulmate. Perhaps it's also about you. Because every meaningful connection asks the same question: are you willing to let go of old fears so something better has room to grow? Your soulmate answered that question last night, not with perfect words, but with a quiet decision to move forward honestly. And from that decision came something far more valuable than certainty. It brought peace. Not the kind of peace that promises every challenge will disappear, but the kind that reminds you that your next step no longer has to be guided by fear. That is why the mystery of who were they with was never the final destination. The real answer was hidden inside what that meeting awakened. Awareness. Courage. A new beginning. Sometimes the person we think changes our future is actually the person who helps us release the past. And once that happens, the path ahead becomes clearer than ever before. If this story made you pause, reflect, or see your own journey from a new perspective, I'd truly enjoy hearing your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective could inspire someone else who's watching today. And if you enjoy these cinematic stories of mystery, hope, and meaningful turning points, subscribing is a simple way to join us for the next journey together. As this chapter closes, remember one thing. Not every secret is meant to create fear. Some secrets exist only until we're ready to understand them. Last night didn't expose a betrayal. It uncovered a transformation. And perhaps that is the greatest surprise of all. So walk forward with confidence. Trust that clarity arrives when the time is right, that every meaningful chapter has its purpose, and that the most beautiful stories are rarely the ones we predict, they are the ones we patiently grow into. Until the next journey. Keep your heart open, your mind curious, and never underestimate the quiet moments that have the power to change everything. One final thought remains, and strangely, it is the one that gives every moment you've heard its true meaning. Stories often end where people expect them to begin. But this one is different. The greatest revelation was never hidden in the shadows of last night, it was quietly waiting inside the choices that followed. Stay with this final chapter, because sometimes the last few words become the first step toward an entirely new beginning. In the weeks ahead, people continued talking about what they believed had happened that night. Rumors traveled faster than truth, as they often do. Every version of the story sounded convincing. Every opinion seemed certain. Yet your soulmate no longer felt the need to explain. Why? Because when someone discovers inner clarity, they stop chasing outside approval. That was the greatest change of all. The questions that once kept them awake had lost their power. Instead of looking backward, they found themselves looking ahead with quiet confidence. They understood that every misunderstanding had taught them patience, every delay had strengthened their character, and every unexpected turn had prepared them for a future they couldn't have imagined before. Life has an unusual way of testing our perspective. Sometimes it allows confusion to exist for a while, not to mislead us, but to reveal whether we are willing to seek truth instead of assumptions. Perhaps that's why this story found you today. Maybe you've been waiting for certainty. Maybe you've been wondering if every unanswered question will eventually make sense. The answer isn't hidden in perfect timing. It's hidden in steady growth. The meeting last night became unforgettable, not because of the person standing beside your soulmate, but because it marked the exact moment they stopped allowing yesterday to define tomorrow. That is a turning point no one can take away. And here's something worth remembering. Destiny rarely announces itself with loud applause. More often, it arrives quietly, asking only one question. Are you ready to become the person your future has been waiting for? Your soulmate answered that question with courage. Now perhaps life is asking you the very same thing. Imagine looking back months from now and realizing that today was the day your perspective changed. Not because every mystery disappeared overnight, but because you chose peace over fear, wisdom over assumptions, and hope over uncertainty. That is how meaningful stories continue long after the final scene. If this journey stayed with you until the very end, thank you for sharing these moments together. Your thoughts and reflections are always welcome in the comments, because every listener discovers a different lesson within the same story. And if these cinematic journeys of mystery, hope, and self-discovery continue to resonate with you, I'd be grateful to have you here for the next chapter as well. As we close this story, remember this simple truth. The biggest question was never, who were they with? The real question was, what did that night awaken inside them? And now you know the answer. It awakened honesty. It awakened courage. It awakened the freedom to move toward the future without carrying the weight of the past. Some stories end with a surprise. The best stories end with transformation. May you carry that thought with you today, because somewhere beyond today's horizon, another unexpected chapter is already waiting to be written. And sometimes, the most extraordinary destination begins with one quiet moment that almost everyone else misunderstood. A new chapter always begins long before anyone realizes the old one has truly ended, and if you've reached this moment, you've already discovered that the greatest mysteries are never solved by rushing. They are revealed through patience, perspective, and quiet courage. Before this story fades into memory, there is one final truth that deserves to be heard. Several days after that unforgettable night, your soulmate found themselves returning, not to the same place, but to the same feeling. They remembered every detail of that conversation, every pause,